The customs officer barely glanced up from his paperwork when Elena Vasquez handed him her permit renewal forms. Just another local tour guide trying to keep her wilderness certification current, he thought, stamping the documents with practiced indifference. He had no way of knowing that the quiet woman standing before him had memorized every hidden trail, every forgotten cave, every secret passage through the Carpathian Mountains that could mean the difference between freedom and death. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the peaks of the Carpathian Mountains as Elena Vasquez unlocked the wooden door of Mountain Adventures Tourist Services. The small office sat at the edge of Brasov, Romania, wedged between a souvenir shop selling plastic, Dracula fangs, and a café that served overpriced coffee to backpackers. Elena's business was exactly what it appeared to be on the surface, a modest operation offering hiking tours to tourists who wanted to experience the rugged beauty of the region without getting lost or eaten by bears. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and Elena went through her usual morning routine. She checked the weather reports, reviewed the day's bookings, and arranged her laminated trail maps in neat stacks on the counter. Everything about her suggested competence, but nothing more. She was 32 years old, spoke adequate English with a thick accent, and wore the kind of practical outdoor clothing that marked her as someone who spent her days walking tourists through well-established hiking routes. At 8:30 sharp, her first clients of the day arrived. The Hendersons were a middle-aged American couple celebrating their anniversary with a European vacation. They had booked Elena's most popular package, a gentle 3-hour hike through the lower mountain trails with lunch and a scenic overlook and plenty of photo opportunities. Mrs. Henderson examined Elena skeptically as she explained the day's itinerary. The tour guide looked younger than expected, and her English, while functional, carried the kind of accent that made tourists unconsciously speak louder and slower. Mr. Henderson interrupted Elena's safety briefing to ask if there were any real guides available, someone with more experience handling international clients. Elena's expression didn't change, but she calmly explained that she had been leading tours in these mountains for 8 years and was certified in wilderness first aid, mountain rescue, and emergency procedures. She spoke matter-of-factly, without defensiveness, as if she was accustomed to such questions. The Hendersons exchanged glances but decided to proceed, having already paid the deposit. As they began their hike along the marked trail, Elena pointed out local flora and fauna with the rehearsed enthusiasm of someone who had given the same presentation hundreds of times. She identified bird calls, explained the geological formation of the rock faces, and shared carefully selected local legends that tourists enjoyed. Her knowledge seemed adequate but unremarkable, drawn from guidebooks and standard training courses. But Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a geology professor from Edinburgh who had joined the tour as a solo traveler, began to notice inconsistencies in Elena's explanations. When Elena casually mentioned that certain rock formations indicated ancient glacial movement patterns, she was describing geological phenomena that weren't covered in typical tour guide training. When she identified a particular bird call as belonging to a species that was supposed to be rare in this region, Dr. Mitchell made a mental note to research it later. The group stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook, and Elena unpacked sandwiches and thermoses of hot tea with efficient movements. As they ate, Mrs. Henderson complained about the difficulty of the trail, which was clearly marked as easy in all the tourism materials. Elena listened politely, then suggested an alternative route back that would be more comfortable while still providing excellent views. Dr. Mitchell observed as Elena consulted what appeared to be a standard tourist map, but her eyes seemed to be tracking features that weren't marked on the laminated surface. When Elena pointed out their return route, she indicated a path that curved around a steep section, but her gesture suggested familiarity with terrain that extended far beyond the marked boundaries of the tourist area. Back in town that afternoon, Dr. Mitchell decided to research her observations. She visited the local tourism office and asked about Elena's credentials. The clerk, a cheerful woman named Anka, was happy to verify that Elena Vasquez was indeed properly licensed and had an excellent safety record. She had been operating her small business for nearly a decade without incident, maintaining the kind of steady, unremarkable reputation that kept her booked throughout the tourist season. But when Dr. Mitchell asked about Elena's background before she started the tour business, Anka's information became vague. Elena had apparently moved to Brasov from somewhere else in Romania, had excellent local knowledge, and kept to herself outside of work. The clerk seemed to know nothing about her education, her family, or what had brought her to become a tour guide in this particular region. That evening, Dr. Mitchell encountered Elena at a local restaurant where she was having dinner alone, reading what appeared to be a technical manual rather than tourist literature. The book was in Romanian, but Dr. Mitchell caught glimpses of diagrams that looked more like topographical surveys than anything related to recreational hiking. When Elena noticed her observation, she casually closed the book and switched to reading a magazine about regional tourism. Their conversation was pleasant, but unrevealing. Elena answered questions about local history and culture with the practiced responses of someone accustomed to curious travelers, but she skillfully deflected personal inquiries. When Dr. Mitchell mentioned her own background in geology and asked about Elena's education, she received only a vague response about studying tourism and hospitality management somewhere in Bucharest. The next morning brought an unexpected encounter that would begin to crack Elena's carefully constructed facade. Dr. Mitchell had decided to extend her stay and booked another tour, but this time she arrived at the office to find Elena in conversation with a man who clearly wasn't a tourist. He was young, perhaps in his early 20s, with the kind of hollow-eyed exhaustion that suggested he hadn't slept properly in days. His clothes were dirty and ill-fitting, and he spoke to Elena in rapid, desperate whispers. Elena's entire demeanor changed during this conversation. Gone was the cheerful professionalism she displayed with tourists. Instead, she listened with intense focus, asking sharp, specific questions in what sounded like multiple languages. Dr. Mitchell, waiting near the door, couldn't understand the words, but recognized the tone of someone receiving crucial information. Under pressure. When the man left through the back exit, Elena needed a moment to compose herself before turning to greet Dr. Mitchell with her usual tourist-friendly smile. But something fundamental had shifted. The geology professor had witnessed a glimpse of someone operating with a level of urgency and competence that had nothing to do with leading wealthy foreigners on nature walks. During that day's hike, Dr. Mitchell paid closer attention to Elena's movements and observations. She noticed that Elena's eyes constantly scanned the horizon in patterns that suggested she was monitoring for more than wildlife and weather. When she pointed out landmarks and trail features, her descriptions occasionally included details about sightlines, shelter availability, and water sources that went far beyond tourist interest. Most tellingly, when they encountered a group of local hikers coming down from the higher elevations, Elena engaged them in brief conversations that seemed to involve more than casual trail talk. Dr. Mitchell observed an exchange of information, subtle gestures, and meaningful looks that suggested Elena was part of some kind of informal network among people who use these mountains regularly. As they returned to town that afternoon, Dr. Mitchell made a decision that would change everything. Instead of keeping her growing suspicions to herself, she waited until they were back at Elena's office and asked a direct question. Elena was organizing her equipment when Dr. Mitchell said quietly, "I don't think you're just a tour guide." Elena's hands stilled on the hiking poles she was storing. For a long moment, she didn't respond. When she finally looked up, Dr. Mitchell saw something in her eyes that confirmed her suspicion. This was someone carrying the weight of secrets that went far beyond anything related to recreational tourism. The facade was beginning to crack, and both women knew it. Elena stared at Dr. Mitchell for what felt like an eternity, weighing her options. The office suddenly felt too small, too exposed. She could hear the afternoon tourist buses rumbling past outside, their diesel engines masking the sound of her rapid heartbeat. Finally, she walked to the window and drew the curtains closed, then turned the sign on the door to indicate the office was closed for the day. "Dr. Mitchell," Elena said carefully, "there are some conversations that are dangerous to have, and some knowledge that is dangerous to possess. Are you certain you want to continue this discussion?" The geology professor nodded without hesitation. "I've spent my career studying how pressure creates fractures in solid rock. I recognize when something is under tremendous strain. You're carrying something heavy, Elena, and I suspect it has nothing to do with tourism." Elena moved to her desk and opened what appeared to be a routine filing cabinet. But instead of tourist permits and insurance documents, she withdrew a detailed topographical map that showed features Dr. Mitchell had never seen on any commercial chart. The map depicted remote mountain passes, unmarked trails, and natural formations that could provide shelter or concealment. Red ink marked certain routes, while others were crossed out entirely. 3 years ago, Elena began, her accent noticeably thinner now that she wasn't performing the tour guide role, "I was working as a geological surveyor for the Ministry of Natural Resources. My job was to map remote areas for potential mining operations and environmental protection zones. I spent months alone in the mountains, charting every cave, every stream, every possible route through terrain that most people consider impassable." She traced one of the red lines with her finger. "During one survey expedition, I discovered something the maps didn't show. People were using these mountains as escape routes. Families fleeing violence, persecution, economic desperation. They were attempting to cross the border using dangerous paths, without proper equipment or knowledge of the terrain. Many were dying." Dr. Mitchell studied the map, beginning to understand the complexity of what Elena was describing. The Carpathian Range formed natural borders between several countries, and she knew from news reports that political instability in the region had created refugee crises. But she had never considered how people might attempt to navigate such treacherous terrain. "The first family I encountered," Elena continued, "was a mother with 2 young children. They had been walking for 3 days, following information they'd purchased from smugglers who had given them completely inaccurate directions. The children were hypothermic, and they were all suffering from dehydration. If I hadn't found them when I did, they would have died within hours." Elena opened another drawer and withdrew what looked like a standard first aid kit. But when she opened it, Dr. Mitchell saw supplies that went far beyond basic medical care. Emergency blankets, high-calorie nutrition bars, water purification, tablets, and medications that would be crucial for treating exposure and exhaustion. "I couldn't just abandon them," Elena said. "I guided them to safety, gave them proper supplies, and showed them how to reach the border crossing without detection by authorities, who would send them back to the dangers they were fleeing. When I returned to my regular job, I couldn't stop thinking about how many others might be making similar attempts with no guidance at all." The young man who had visited the office that morning suddenly made sense. Dr. Mitchell realized she had witnessed Elena receiving intelligence about people in need of assistance, not casual conversation with a local resident. "So you created the tour guide business as cover," Dr. Mitchell said. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded. "The geological survey work gave me legitimate reasons to be in remote areas of the mountains, but it was irregular and closely monitored. A tourism business allows me to maintain detailed knowledge of trail conditions, weather patterns, and safe routes while appearing to serve a completely different purpose. I can conduct reconnaissance, cache supplies, and coordinate with others who assist refugees without drawing official attention. She gestured toward the tourist permits and licenses displayed on her office wall. Every certificate is genuine. I am actually qualified to guide tourists through these mountains, but the tourist income also funds something else entirely. Emergency shelters, medical supplies, communication equipment, and safe houses for people who need temporary refuge. Before continuing their journeys, Dr. Mitchell felt a chill as she understood the full scope of what Elena was describing. How many people have you helped? Over the past 3 years, approximately 230 families, Elena answered without hesitation. Some are political refugees fleeing authoritarian regimes. Others are families escaping economic collapse or ethnic persecution. A few are individuals whose lives are threatened for reasons related to their beliefs, their sexuality, or their opposition to corruption. The weight of this revelation settled over Dr. Mitchell. She was sitting in what appeared to be a modest tourist business, but she was actually inside the operational center of a sophisticated rescue network that operated entirely outside official channels. Elena pulled out a weatherproof radio and performed a quick equipment check. The young man you saw this morning brought word about a family that will be arriving tonight. Parents with 3 children, including an infant. They've been traveling for over a week, and their route has been compromised by increased patrol activity along the main crossing points. She consulted what appeared to be a weather report, but Dr. Mitchell noticed it contained information about visibility conditions, moon phases, and patrol schedules that wouldn't be relevant to tourism. The weather window is closing. There's a storm system moving in that will make travel extremely dangerous, but it will also provide cover from detection. If this family doesn't cross tonight, they'll be trapped in exposed terrain for potentially days. Elena's radio crackled with a brief transmission in what sounded like coded language. She responded with equally cryptic phrases, then turned back to Dr. Mitchell with an expression that conveyed both determination and resignation. Dr. Mitchell, I need to ask you to leave now. In approximately 2 hours, I have to guide 5 people, including a 6-month-old baby, through mountain terrain in conditions that could easily kill experienced climbers. This conversation has already put you in a position where you possess information that could destroy everything I've built here. But Dr. Mitchell surprised Elena by standing up and moving toward the detailed topographical map. I've spent 15 years studying mountain geology. I understand terrain analysis, weather patterns, and route optimization. I also understand that you're about to attempt something incredibly dangerous alone. Elena shook her head firmly. This isn't tourism, Dr. Mitchell. This is illegal border crossing, human smuggling, and violation of multiple international laws. If something goes wrong, if we're caught, you would face criminal prosecution in multiple countries. You could lose your career, your freedom, your entire life. And if you go alone and something happens to you, 5 people die, Dr. Mitchell replied quietly, including a baby who didn't choose any of this. Elena studied the geography professor's face, seeing something she recognized from her own mirror, the expression of someone who had reached a moment where moral conviction overrode personal safety considerations. This route, Elena said, pointing to a path marked in red ink, requires crossing exposed ridgelines in what will likely be near whiteout conditions. We'll be carrying additional weight and supplies for the family, navigating by compass and memory when visibility drops to 0, and maintaining absolute silence to avoid detection by border patrols, who shoot first and ask questions later. Dr. Mitchell examined the route Elena had indicated, her professional training automatically analyzing slope gradients, exposure risks, and technical challenges. The geological survey data I've seen for this region shows unstable scree fields along these ridgelines. Recent rainfall could create additional hazards, which is exactly why I've spent 3 years mapping alternative routes that avoid the most dangerous areas, Elena responded. But those alternatives add hours to the crossing time, and with the incoming weather system, hours could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. The radio crackled again with another brief. Transmission. Elena's expression tightened as she responded. The family has been detected by preliminary patrol sweeps. They're moving toward the rendezvous point earlier than planned, which means we have less time to prepare and less margin for error. Dr. Mitchell made her decision. What equipment do I need? Elena looked at her for a long moment, then opened a storage closet that revealed gear that had nothing to do with recreational hiking. Military-grade cold weather clothing, professional mountaineering equipment, emergency medical supplies, and communication devices that appeared designed for covert operations. If you're absolutely certain about this, Elena said, then we need to move quickly. Once we leave this office, there's no turning back, and there's no guarantee that any of us will return. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees by the time Elena and Dr. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mitchell reached the rendezvous point, a natural cave formation hidden behind a waterfall that appeared on no tourist maps. Elena moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had memorized every rock and route along the path, while Dr. Mitchell followed closely, amazed by the precision of Elena's navigation in conditions where visibility was nearly zero. Inside the cave, 5 figures huddled around a small, shielded heating device that provided warmth without producing visible light. Elena spoke to them in hushed tones, switching between 3 different languages as she assessed their condition and explained what lay ahead. The family consisted of parents in their 30s, 2 children aged 8 and 12, and an infant who remained remarkably quiet despite the cold and stress. Dr. Mitchell watched Elena transform completely as she took charge of the situation. Gone entirely was any trace of the cheerful tour guide persona. In its place was someone who moved with military precision, conducting equipment checks, medical assessments, and tactical planning with expertise that clearly came from extensive training and experience. Elena distributed specialized cold weather gear to each family member, adjusting straps and explaining proper usage with the efficiency of someone who had performed these actions countless times. She administered medication to treat minor injuries and dehydration, then briefed everyone on hand signals, emergency procedures, and the absolute necessity of maintaining silence once they began moving. The route we're taking tonight, Elena explained to Dr. Mitchell while preparing her navigation equipment, was used by resistance fighters during World War II and later by people fleeing communist regimes. I've modified it based on current patrol patterns and modern surveillance technology, but the fundamental principle remains the same. We move through terrain that's too dangerous for casual pursuit. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally arrived with devastating intensity. Wind howled through the cave entrance, and Elena consulted her instruments to track the weather system's progression. Rather than viewing the storm as an additional obstacle, she seemed to be calculating how to use it as an advantage. The weather will mask our movement and force the patrol units to seek shelter, she explained to Dr. Mitchell. But it also means we'll be navigating through conditions that could kill us if we make mistakes. The margin for error is essentially zero. Elena's radio crackled with a transmission that caused her expression to change dramatically. She responded in rapid coded phrases, then turned to address both Dr. Mitchell and the family with obvious urgency. Border Patrol activity has increased significantly in the past hour. Our original route has been compromised by unexpected patrol deployments. We need to use the emergency alternative, which means crossing terrain that I've only mapped theoretically, never actually traversed with civilians. Dr. Mitchell studied Elena's backup route on the topographical map, her geological training immediately identifying multiple hazards. The path required crossing exposed granite faces that would be treacherous. in good weather and potentially lethal in the current storm conditions. Elena, this route passes through areas where the rock formations are inherently unstable. Recent precipitation could have created conditions where even minor vibrations could trigger rock falls or structural collapses. Elena nodded grimly. I know. But the alternative is staying here until the patrols discover this shelter, which intelligence suggests will happen before dawn. We have perhaps 4 hours to complete a crossing that normally requires 6 hours in ideal conditions. She gathered the family around the map and explained the new plan, her voice steady despite the obvious danger they were all facing. Each person would be tethered to Elena with climbing rope, allowing her to guide them safely even when visibility dropped to 0. Dr. Mitchell would follow at the rear, using her geological expertise to monitor for signs of terrain instability. As they prepared to leave the shelter, Elena made one final equipment check and pulled Dr. Mitchell aside for a private conversation. Dr. Mitchell, you need to understand something before we continue. This isn't my first career, and tourism isn't my background. I served 8 years in the Romanian Special Forces, specializing in mountain warfare and cross-border reconnaissance operations. When I left military service, I chose to use those skills for humanitarian purposes rather than political ones. The revelation explained everything Dr. Mitchell had observed about Elena's capabilities, her tactical thinking, and her apparent familiarity with dangerous operations. But it also raised new questions about why someone with such specialized military training had chosen to operate as an underground refugee guide. After my military service ended, Elena continued, I discovered that the skills I developed for warfare could save lives in different ways. Every family I guide to safety represents a choice to use my training for protection rather than destruction. It's my way of balancing the scales. They emerged from the cave into conditions that were worse than Dr. Mitchell had anticipated. The storm had intensified to near blizzard levels, with wind speeds that made communication difficult and visibility that rarely extended beyond arm's length. Elena immediately took the lead position, moving with supernatural confidence through terrain that would have been challenging for experienced mountaineers in daylight. For the next 3 hours, Dr. Mitchell witnessed a display of wilderness expertise that exceeded anything she had imagined possible. Elena navigated through unmarked terrain using compass bearings, natural landmarks, and what appeared to be an internal mapping system that functioned independent of external references. She identified safe passage routes through areas where a wrong step could result in fatal falls, guided the group around unstable scree fields, and maintained a pace that was challenging but sustainable for civilians carrying children. The infant remained remarkably quiet throughout the journey, but Dr. Mitchell noticed that Elena had positioned herself to shield the baby from the worst of the wind and precipitation. When the 8-year-old began showing signs of exhaustion and hypothermia, Elena immediately implemented warming procedures and adjusted the group's pace to accommodate the child's limitations. Halfway through the crossing, Elena's radio received another transmission that caused her to halt the group and consult her equipment. Border Patrol units had detected movement in their general area and were deploying search teams with thermal imaging capabilities. Elena made rapid calculations, then led the group to a concealed position among rock formations that would mask their heat signatures. For 45 minutes, they remained motionless while search helicopters passed overhead, their powerful spotlights sweeping the terrain in systematic patterns. Dr. Mitchell could hear the aircraft engines through the storm noise and realized how easily their rescue mission could have become a capture or worse. When the search aircraft finally moved to other areas, Elena resumed navigation toward the border crossing point. But the delay had cost them precious time, and dawn was approaching rapidly. In daylight, their chances of detection would increase exponentially, and the family would be exposed to dangers that went far beyond weather and terrain. Elena pushed the pace as much as she dared, but Dr. Mitchell could see the toll the journey was taking on the civilians. The parents were exhausted, the children were approaching the limits of their endurance, and the infant needed medical attention that couldn't be provided until they reached safety. As they crested the final ridge before the border crossing, Elena's radio crackled with an emergency transmission. Border patrol units had established checkpoints at all official crossing points, and the safe houses on the other side had been compromised by informants. The carefully planned conclusion to their rescue mission had disintegrated, leaving them stranded in hostile territory with no predetermined escape route. Dr. Mitchell watched Elena process this devastating news, then make decisions with the calm precision of someone trained to function under extreme pressure. She consulted her maps, identified alternative crossing points that weren't under surveillance, and coordinated with contacts she reached through encrypted communications. "There's an emergency protocol for situations like this," Elena explained quietly to Dr. Mitchell. "A network of people who provide assistance when official channels fail. But using it means exposing resources that have taken years to establish, and risking the safety of operations that help dozens of families each month." Elena looked at the exhausted family, then at the approaching dawn that would end their window of concealment. Without hesitation, she activated the emergency protocol, calling in assistance that would save these 5 lives at the cost of compromising future rescue operations. Within an hour, vehicles appeared at coordinates Elena had specified, operated by people who asked no questions and provided immediate medical care, warm clothing, and transportation to genuine safety. As the family was loaded into the vehicles, the mother approached Elena with tears in her eyes, trying to express gratitude that transcended language barriers. Dr. Mitchell watched Elena accept the family's thanks with quiet dignity, then immediately begin planning how to rebuild the network resources that had been sacrificed for this single rescue. It was then that she fully understood the scope of Elena's commitment and the personal cost of her chosen mission. As dawn broke over the Carpathian Mountains, Elena and Dr. Mitchell began their return journey to Brasov. But Dr. Mitchell knew that everything had changed, both for herself and for the remarkable woman she had initially mistaken for a simple tour guide. Elena had revealed herself to be someone operating at the intersection of military expertise, humanitarian conviction, and moral courage that few people possessed. And Dr. Mitchell had discovered that sometimes the most important work in the world was done by people who remained invisible, whose heroism was measured not in recognition but in lives saved and families reunited. The tour guide business would continue, maintaining its cover while serving its deeper purpose. But now Elena wouldn't be working entirely alone, and the mountains would be slightly less dangerous for the desperate families who had nowhere else to turn. 3 weeks after the mountain rescue, Elena was reorganizing her office when she noticed the black sedan parked across the street. The vehicle had been there for 2 days, its occupants maintaining surveillance with the kind of professional discretion that marked them as government operatives rather than local police. Elena continued her routine activities, while mentally cataloging escape routes and preparing for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. Dr. Mitchell had returned to Edinburgh, but not before spending several days helping Elena establish new communication protocols and supply caches. The geology professor had proven surprisingly adept at covert operations, using her academic credentials to research border region geology while actually mapping potential refugee routes. Before departing, she had made Elena promise to contact her if the situation became untenable. The promised confrontation arrived on a Thursday morning when Elena opened her office to find 2 individuals waiting inside. The man wore the kind of expensive suit that suggested high-level government authority, while the woman beside him carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to conducting sensitive interrogations. Neither had forced entry, which meant they possessed keys that Elena had never distributed. The man introduced himself as Deputy Director Radu Antonescu, from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, while his companion identified herself as Agent Maria Popescu from the European Union Border Security Agency. Their presence indicated that Lena's activities had attracted attention at levels far above local law enforcement. Ms. Vasquez, Director Antonescu began, "We've been monitoring your business operations with considerable interest. Your tourism enterprise has generated remarkably detailed reports about remote mountain terrain, and your client base includes several individuals whose backgrounds have raised security concerns." Elena maintained her tour guide persona, expressing confusion and concern about whatever misunderstanding had brought such important officials to her modest business. But Agent Popescu interrupted with a folder containing surveillance photographs that documented Elena's recent activities with unmistakable clarity. The images showed Elena meeting with individuals who were clearly not tourists, conducting equipment transfers in remote locations, and moving through terrain that was decidedly off-limits to civilian recreation. One photograph captured her leading the refugee family through the mountain pass, clearly identifiable despite the storm conditions. "We're aware of your military background, Captain Vasquez," Agent Popescu continued, using Elena's former rank with deliberate emphasis. 8 years with the Romanian Special Forces, including specialized training in mountain warfare, reconnaissance operations, and cross-border intelligence gathering. Your service record was exemplary until your resignation 3 years ago. Director Antonescu leaned forward, his expression serious but not hostile. "The question we're here to discuss is not whether you've been operating an unauthorized refugee assistance network. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The question is whether you're going to continue operating as a criminal or begin working within legal frameworks." Elena realized that this conversation was not proceeding as she had anticipated. Rather than facing arrest and prosecution, she was apparently being offered some form of official recognition or sanction for activities that were technically illegal under multiple jurisdictions. Agent Popescu opened another folder containing documents that Elena recognized as official European Union policy papers. The refugee crisis in this region has created humanitarian challenges that existing legal frameworks cannot adequately address. Traditional asylum procedures are overwhelmed. Official crossing points are controlled by criminal organizations, and desperate families are dying in preventable circumstances. Director Antonescu nodded agreement. Simultaneously, we're facing increased security threats from human trafficking networks, drug smuggling operations, and potential terrorist infiltration. The current system fails both humanitarian needs and security requirements. Elena listened carefully, beginning to understand that her unofficial rescue network had attracted attention not because it violated policy, but because it demonstrated capabilities that official agencies lacked. Her success in moving people safely through dangerous terrain, while maintaining security and avoiding criminal exploitation, had apparently impressed rather than alarmed certain government officials. 3 months ago, Agent Popescu explained, a joint European Union task force was authorized to develop alternative approaches to border security that could address humanitarian concerns while maintaining territorial integrity. Your operations have provided a working model for what such approaches might accomplish. Elena felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as the conversation's direction became clear. Rather than facing prosecution, she was being recruited into some form of official capacity that would legitimize her rescue activities while bringing them under government oversight. Director Antonescu presented Elena with a detailed proposal that had clearly been under development for some time. The European Union was prepared to create a new position within the Border Security Agency, specifically designed for individuals with Elena's unique combination of military expertise, local knowledge, and humanitarian experience. The official title would be Regional Humanitarian Coordinator, with authority to conduct search and rescue operations in remote border areas, coordinate with international refugee assistance organizations, and develop protocols for managing civilian populations. In crisis situations, Elena would receive full government credentials, adequate funding for equipment and personnel, and legal protection for activities that were currently conducted outside official channels. Agent Popescu explained the broader implications of the offer. We're not just talking about legitimizing your current operations. We're proposing to expand them significantly, with proper resources and institutional support. Instead of helping individual families on an ad hoc basis, you would be developing systematic approaches that could assist thousands of people, while gathering intelligence about criminal networks and security threats. Elena studied the documents they had presented, recognizing both the opportunities and the constraints that official status would entail. Government employment would provide resources and legal protection, but it would also impose oversight, reporting requirements, and political considerations that could compromise operational effectiveness. There would be conditions, Director Antonescu acknowledged. Your activities would need to be coordinated with existing law enforcement agencies. Your methods would require approval through established channels, and you would be accountable to supervisors who might not understand the complexities of field operations. Elena asked pointed questions about operational autonomy, decision-making authority, and the extent to which bureaucratic procedures would interfere with time-sensitive rescue situations. The answers revealed that while the government was serious about supporting her work, they were also serious about maintaining control over activities that could have significant political implications. Agent Popescu addressed Elena's concerns directly. We understand that effective humanitarian operations require flexibility and rapid response capabilities that don't always align with administrative procedures. The position we're offering includes provisions for independent operational authority in emergency situations, with retroactive reporting rather than prior approval requirements. The conversation continued for several hours, covering details about personnel, equipment, territorial authority, and coordination with international organizations. Elena gradually understood that the offer represented a genuine opportunity to expand her rescue capabilities while gaining legal protection and institutional resources. But the most significant revelation came when Director Antonescu explained the selection process that had led to Elena's recruitment. Over the past year, we've been monitoring several individuals who were conducting similar operations in different regions. Your network demonstrated superior safety records, security procedures, and humanitarian outcomes compared to all other alternatives. Elena realized that her careful work to remain invisible had actually made her more visible to people whose job was to notice patterns and capabilities that others missed. Her success in maintaining operational security while achieving humanitarian objectives had marked her as exactly the kind of asset that government agencies valued most. Dr. Mitchell's influence became apparent when Agent Popescu mentioned that academic geological surveys had provided crucial intelligence about terrain conditions and route feasibility that had contributed to Elena's operational assessments. The geology professor had apparently been sharing information with authorities, not to betray Elena's activities, but to support arguments for official recognition and resources. As the meeting concluded, Elena was given 48 hours to consider the offer. The officials emphasized that her decision would affect not only her own future, but also the fate of hundreds of families who might need assistance in the coming months. Director Antonescu's final words carried particular weight. Captain Vasquez, you've already proven that one person with the right skills and commitment can make an extraordinary difference. We're offering you the opportunity to discover what you might accomplish with official support and adequate resources. After the officials departed, Elena sat alone in her office, contemplating a decision that would fundamentally change both her mission and her life. The tour guide facade that had protected her for 3 years was ending, but something much larger was beginning. Elena picked up her encrypted phone and sent a message to Dr. Mitchell, The mountains are about to become safer for everyone who needs them to be. 6 months later, Elena stood before a wall-mounted display in her new headquarters, tracking the movement of refugee families across a digital map that covered the entire Carpathian border region. The modest tourist office had been replaced by a sophisticated command center equipped with satellite communications, weather monitoring systems, and coordination networks that connected humanitarian organizations across 3 countries. Her official title was Regional Humanitarian Coordinator, but the refugees who benefited from her work had given her a different name. They called her the Mountain Angel, a designation that had spread through underground networks and displaced communities throughout Eastern Europe. Elena preferred the anonymity she had maintained as a tour guide, but she couldn't argue with the results that official recognition had made possible. Dr. Mitchell arrived from Edinburgh that morning, carrying geological survey data that would be crucial for establishing new emergency shelter locations in remote areas. The geology professor had accepted a consulting position with the European Union Border Security Agency, using her academic expertise to support humanitarian operations while maintaining her university research responsibilities. The terrain analysis for the northern routes is complete, Dr. Mitchell reported, spreading detailed topographical charts across Elena's desk. We've identified 12 locations suitable for permanent emergency shelters, each positioned to provide refuge for families attempting border crossings during severe weather conditions. Elena studied the proposed shelter locations mentally, calculating how they would integrate with existing rescue protocols and supply networks. Her new position had provided resources she could never have imagined during her years as an unofficial guide, but it had also revealed the staggering scope of need that existed throughout the region. The shelters will need to accommodate families with medical emergencies, Elena noted, marking specific locations on the charts. We've learned that approximately 30% of the families we assist include individuals requiring immediate health care, often children or elderly people who can't survive extended exposure to mountain conditions. Agent Popescu entered the command center carrying intelligence reports that had arrived through official channels. The information flow available to Elena's operation now included real-time updates about border patrol activities, weather systems, and security threats that could affect civilian movement through remote areas. Intelligence indicates increased activity by criminal trafficking organizations along the southern routes, Agent Popescu announced. They're targeting families who can't afford professional smuggling services, offering false guidance, and then abandoning people in dangerous terrain after collecting payment. Elena's expression hardened as she reviewed the intelligence data. Criminal exploitation of desperate refugees represented everything she had worked to prevent, and her new official status provided tools for addressing such threats directly. We'll coordinate with law enforcement to disrupt the trafficking networks while simultaneously expanding legitimate assistance options, Elena decided. Families need to know that safe alternatives exist, and criminals need to understand that their activities will not be tolerated. Her computer chimed with an incoming communication from a field team leader requesting immediate assistance. A family of 7 had been detected attempting a dangerous crossing during deteriorating weather conditions, and rescue intervention was needed within hours to prevent potential casualties. Elena activated emergency protocols that had been impossible during her tour guide years. Within minutes, she had dispatched a properly equipped search and rescue team, coordinated with medical personnel standing by at the nearest hospital, and alerted border officials to facilitate legal processing once the family reached safety. Dr. Mitchell observed the rescue coordination with professional admiration. Elena, in 6 months you've accomplished more than most humanitarian organizations achieve in years. The systematic approach, the integration of multiple agencies, the combination of immediate assistance with long-term policy development, it's extraordinary. Elena monitored communications from the field team as they located the endangered family and began guiding them toward safety. The rescue operation proceeded with efficiency that reflected months of training, planning, and resource development that had transformed crisis response from improvised heroics into professional humanitarian service. The difference is legitimacy, Elena explained while tracking the rescue team's progress. Operating outside official channels required constant improvisation and limited our ability to coordinate with other organizations. Government recognition has provided access to resources, information, and partnerships that multiply our effectiveness exponentially. Director Antonescu arrived for a scheduled briefing about regional policy developments that would affect Elena's operations. The Ministry of Internal Affairs had been impressed by the success of the Humanitarian Coordination Program and was considering expanding similar approaches to other border regions throughout the European Union. Your model has attracted international attention, Director Antonescu informed Elena. Representatives from 5 countries have requested briefings about your methods, and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has inquired about implementing similar programs in other crisis regions. Elena felt a mixture of pride and apprehension about the growing recognition. Expansion could help thousands of additional refugees, but it could also dilute the personal attention and local knowledge that made her current operations effective. Scaling up requires careful consideration of regional differences, Elena responded. The techniques that work in the Carpathian Mountains might not be appropriate for desert borders or coastal areas. Each region needs coordinators who understand local conditions and have established relationships with community networks. The field team radioed confirmation that the refugee family had been successfully guided to safety and was receiving medical care at a border processing facility. Elena updated her tracking systems and began analyzing the incident to identify lessons that could improve future rescue operations. Agent Popescu presented Elena with a folder containing letters from families who had been assisted by her operations over the past 6 months. The correspondence came from across Europe, written in multiple languages, expressing gratitude that often brought tears to the eyes of even experienced humanitarian workers. This letter is from a doctor who's now working in a German hospital, Agent Popescu explained. He credits your rescue team with saving his family's lives and enabling him to contribute his medical skills in his new country. His children are excelling in school, and his wife has started a support group for other refugee families. Elena read through several letters, reminded of why she had initially chosen to abandon her military career in favor of humanitarian work. Each successful rescue represented not just immediate safety, but futures that would unfold across generations as families rebuilt their lives in environments where they could thrive. Dr. Mitchell's research had identified patterns in refugee movement that were enabling Elena's team to position resources more effectively. Geological features that provide natural shelter correlate with traditional migration routes that have been used for centuries, Dr. Mitchell explained. Understanding these patterns allows us to anticipate where assistance will be needed rather than simply responding to emergencies. Elena's radio crackled with a transmission from another field team, reporting successful completion of a mission that had begun the previous evening. A group of 8 refugees, including 2 pregnant women, had been guided safely across challenging terrain and were now receiving appropriate care at a reception facility. Successful rescue number 218 since official operations began, Elena announced to her team. 0 casualties, 0 individuals returned to dangerous situations, and comprehensive support services provided to every family we've assisted. Director Antonescu nodded with satisfaction. Captain Vasquez, your success rate exceeds anything we imagined possible when this program was authorized. You've proven that humanitarian objectives and security requirements can be achieved simultaneously through properly designed operations. As evening approached, Elena walked to the observation deck that had been added to her headquarters building. From this vantage point, she could see the mountain peaks where she had once guided tourists on routine hiking expeditions, never imagining that those same trails would become routes to freedom for hundreds of families seeking safety and opportunity. Dr. Mitchell joined her on the observation deck, carrying tea and wrapped warmly against the mountain air. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of being just a tour guide?" she asked. Elena considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I miss the anonymity and the straightforward nature of that work. But I can't imagine returning to a situation where I was helping one family at a time while knowing that systematic approaches could assist dozens simultaneously." Her secure phone buzzed with a message from a contact in the Refugee Assistance Network. Intelligence had identified another family in need of immediate help, and weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Elena smiled as she read the details, already formulating rescue plans in her mind. "Besides," Elena continued, "I discovered something important about myself during these past months. I'm most effective when I'm working at the intersection of individual compassion and institutional capability. The tour guide work taught me to care about specific people, while the official position has given me tools to help those people systematically." As stars appeared above the Carpathian Mountains, Elena returned to her command center to coordinate the evening's rescue operations. The mountains that had once hidden her unauthorized activities now supported a comprehensive humanitarian network that operated with full legal authority and international recognition. Elena had evolved from an underestimated tour guide to an officially recognized coordinator, but her fundamental mission remained unchanged. She helped people find safe passage through dangerous terrain, whether they were tourists seeking adventure or refugees seeking survival. The mountains had always been her calling, and now they were officially her responsibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.